When I talk to many players, regardless if they are a brand new player who is, say, coming from World of Warcraft, or a very experienced Final Fantasy XIV veteran, there is often a concern about which methods they should go about to obtain gil. This is a question that honestly has a massive amount of answers, and I could not possibly hope to cover properly in a single video. That's why this video in particular marks the series start of my gil making tutorial series, where I'm going to do my best to showcase the various skill making methods in detail. If this video or series is interesting to you or helped you in any way, I really do hope that you consider pawing that like button and cat-dadding that subscribe button, especially as a newer creator. Truly, I cannot emphasize enough, everything really makes a huge difference and is super appreciated. Anyhow, as a heads up, this gil making series is not going to be directly labeled in the titles of each video, but I will be putting these all into a gil making playlist because some of the topics are very far reaching and are very viable to be their own independent video on that particular subject. Since this is the first video in the series, I do want to spend just the first little snippet of this video discussing that not every single method is going to be the method you want to choose to do. There are honestly so many different ways to make gil that I will be covering, and I genuinely would be surprised if someone could actually keep up with all of them, even if they really wanted and genuinely tried to, just because there are so many. Really, the beauty of Final Fantasy XIV's gil making methods is just a raw variety of methods. Very often people immediately jump to say, oh, it has to be crafting or gathering, which while those are very effective methods, just to be very clear, they aren't always the most engaging methods for everyone, and that is totally fair and fine, and that's why I'm making this series. So as a playlist on gil making evolves over time on my channel, I'd recommend you to try out the different methods, and if one doesn't work or isn't really your thing, I would suggest you to try to move to another and see if that works. I'm expecting, honestly, by the time that I'm done my first pass over this, that I'm going to have a solid 10 videos or so out initially. But my goal is ultimately to add more to the playlist over time as new methods come out, because I do hope that I'm making content for years. I hope that this evolves. But anyhow, my first video, this one, is going to be the easiest and probably the lamest of all, if I'm super honest. Because I am someone that does definitely believe in the power of passive income, and there is no better way to start to talk about passive income than tombstones. So through doing various forms of content, we amass various types of tombstones. These are a type of currency in Final Fantasy XIV for those who are newer to the game that aren't super familiar, that we can use to exchange for various items or services in game. Right now we have 3 real types and a 4th type that is discontinued. So the discontinued 4th type is going to be marked very clearly in your currency tab, and this can be exchanged at certain NPCs where you can go and change them for a newer type of tombstone that is actually useful for you. So right now this would be the Goetta Tomestones, and the Goetta Tomestones are useless, so try and change them as soon as you can if you do somehow have any. So right now we have Poetics, Phantasmagoria, and Allegory as our current tombstones. But to try and future-proof this video, because I know in a few months we are going to have a shift in this, Poetics, Phantasmagoria, and Allegory represent historical tombstones through Poetics. Phantasmagoria are more like the Workhorse tombstones of the current expansion, and likely will be called Allegory in a few months. And then Allegory are not really a workhorse of the expansion, but rather it is like the gear best in slot kind of tombstone that is really gated and really capped. It's not really that useful for gil making, as I'm going to say at the end of this video, but your main focuses on this video should be Poetics, your historical tombstone, and Phantasmagoria, your real workhorse tombstones. So for my new players to this game, tombstones are a very special type of currency that you don't trade to other players, but instead can exchange at particular merchants for very particular items. You earn these, honestly, quite passively through doing content in the game. I'll explain in each of the tombstone sections how you could try and aggressively farm them, but my strong recommendation is just let it be very passive. And definitely make use of that passive thing, because I know many players that overcap, and sadly, as soon as you hit 2,000 tombstones and are doing content actively, you're not adding more. You're capped at 2,000, and all of those are going to waste. And so try and make the most of your passive resources, because it really does go a long way. So Poetics Tombstones, as I said earlier, can be best thought of as past content tombstone type. They aren't really the most relevant type of tombstone to current content for the most part, but they do sometimes crop up here and there, such as the current relic weapon. So this is going to include stuff like Heaven's Ward relic weapon, Realm Reborn relic weapon, 50, 60, 70 gear sets that were the best in the slot for their particular expansion for a period of time, and various odds and ends. Generally speaking, these tombstones are decent to provide you with a passive flow of gil, but aren't really something that I'd recommend to farm out extensively. Ways that you could farm them out would be, firstly, main scenario roulette every day, which I do think that, especially if you are a newer player or someone who is just looking to get ahead, I do suggest you take your roulettes every day and try and take them very seriously. But main scenario roulette will net you almost 500 poetics each day. Main scenario roulette gives you 300. Now, if you are put into Praetorium, that'll give you 200. And if you get a new player in there, you're going to get another 100. And so that means 300 plus 200 plus 100 is 600 poetics just from main scenario roulette. And that's just really, really good, actually. But now I want to talk about how outside of the roulettes you're going to farm them. And so we just talked about main scenario roulette potentially putting you in Praetorium and how that was really good. Another thing about Praetorium that I don't know if it is said as much as it was back in the day for me many years ago, but it is mostly the AFK Netflix and chill dungeon. You are mostly sitting around doing cutscenes and you're not really fighting. You might do like 5 minutes or so of cutscenes for like half a minute of fighting or something like that, but if you are like watching Netflix or something and want to just tab in back and forth, you will find Praetorium extremely rewarding because you get sometimes 300 tombstones for basically doing nothing if you get a new player in there. And that's really, really good, especially if you're not really planning anything else. Now the third method, outside of the roulette, outside of Praetorium spam, is I would suggest ARF until you BARF, which is a Heaven's Ward term that it was very accurate for grinding the relics back then. But Aetherochemical Research Facility is the name of the dungeon. We call it ARF because Aetherochemical Research Facility until you BARF, and you spam it over and over. This will net you about 150 tombstones baseline, but if you have a new player come in there, that's I think an extra 50. It's been a while, so that would net you 200 tombstones for roughly 15 minutes of your time. But again, that's not super effective use of your time. I'd use this very passively, and I wouldn't grind this up because that is a lot of effort, and this is not the way to actively make gil, in my opinion. So now we get into what we trade Poetics for. So if you go to Ul'dah and talk to Bertana, she has 2 items there that are grade 3 Thanlan and grade 3 Shroud Topsoil. My recommendation is to buy grade 3 Thanlan topsoils. These are absolutely imperative to the gardening ventures that we will be talking about in a little bit, and these do also sell decently well on their own on the market board because grade 3 Thanalan topsoil, not the Shroud, but Thanlan, is extremely important. Extremely important. In fact, if you are looking at following some of my guides, hoard all of the grade 3 Thanlan topsoil that you can because it's going to be so useful, and you don't want to fall prey to the market board because there's a reason why they're selling well on the market board is that you need them. So what you actually need to do to buy the Thanlan topsoil is that you actually need to buy the unidentified ore from the NPC right beside them, and then that is going to be able to be exchanged, these unidentifiable ore pieces, for Thanlan topsoil. And so that is my absolute number 1 recommendation. But for completeness sake, I do want to talk about other options that you have here. So other options that you have are you can go to other consumables from different expansions. So for a Realm Reborn expansion, if you go to More Drama, you can talk to Ariana Grande, and under the other tab, you get a selection of a few neat items that you can sell. In Ul'dah, you can talk to Hismana, which is the same NPC we were just talking about trading for unidentifiable ores, and then you can go to the Tombstones of Poetics other tab, and then there's a bunch of other items there that you can use. And these items are used to craft particular items from that expansion, and they may still be valuable to some people that are leveling or glamour purposes, but for the most part, in my experience, these items are very outdated and not lucrative to people. Now lastly, if you go to the Stormbloods expansions kind of city hub, one of them is called Relgar's Reach, you can talk to Enna and to her other Poetic Tombstones tab, and then you will be met to a very similar situation to Hismana in Ildashire. These are all items, again, that were used to make really powerful gear during Stormblood, but are very outdated now. And I just wanted to raise these as options because if you want to check the market board and see, hey, does this sell really well? Supply and demand dictates that, hey, maybe some of these items are actually really lucrative, and so if you want to do the legwork on that, absolutely do so. But again, my strong recommendation is grade 3 Thanland topsoil all the way. Now with Poetics out of the way, we are going to talk about the next Tombstone type. And big disclaimer here, because I do not want this video to become outdated in like a month or two. Phantasmagoria at the time of writing this document is the current mainline tombstone that you use to purchase crafting materials and reagents. This will likely change come patch 5.4 and onwards to likely be called Allegory. And Phantasmagoria are likely going to be the outdated tombstone, the deprecated tombstone that you try and trade in for something else. So as a heads up, this might be called Allegory by the time that you're checking this video in a few months. But for now, since I'm writing it today, we are calling the current generic workhorse of the current expansion tombstone that you use to buy items, Phantasmagoria. So Phantasmagoria, which are going to be the real bulk of the current expansion tombstone currency, unlike Poetics, these have a very meaningful set of items that you can buy with them. In particular, the newest hotness items like, I'm going to just list all of them off: Caprice Fleece, Megalania Skin, Workbench Resin, Tempest Adhesive, and Dried High Aether were all items that I personally have bought for 3.5k, I sculpted the market, sorry, and then 5k gil per piece back during the launch of patch 5.3's recipes and new crafter and gatherer gear. Not to say that it isn't still relevant, because they are absolutely still relevant, but prices have fallen a little bit just because the items aren't that extremely high in demand, and it just goes that every patch cycle, the newest hotness items are the most expensive for like a period of time. And by now it's cooled down a little bit. But no doubt, no shadow of a doubt, it's very much worth your time to dump any excess Phantasmagoria tombstones that you get passively here for gil. Now, in terms of farming Phantasmagoria, very similar story to Poetics. I am going to be honest and say I would not farm my millions of gil spamming dungeons for Phantasmagoria. But passively, I would definitely do it. So again, what methods I would recommend would be do your dailies, and if you really do want to grind it, I would suggest then doing the latest two dungeons, which at the time of writing this are Animasis Ander and the Hero's Gauntlet, but patch 5.5 is probably going to add new dungeons, and so it's going to change in the future. Now for the last tombstone type, just to cap this off, this is the cutting edge tombstone is what I'm going to call this. The newest of the new tombstone that is used to get the best of the slot gear. And being honest, that's about all you can really use it for at this point. You can't really turn it into gil at present in any way that doesn't involve breaking hearts, because the way to do it would be to turn in something like a body piece, which would require like 2 weeks of capping your tombstones, and then trading that for Grand Company seals, for Grand Company vendor seals. Just don't do that. That hurts everyone. That hurts everyone. So for gil making, these tombstones are pretty worthless if I'm being honest. Anyhow, that ends this first video, and I hope that I gave enough context to make this useful for my awesome fans that are new to Final Fantasy XIV, and enough information to start this gil making off series right. Anyhow, if this video helped you in any way, I'd super appreciate if you gently nudged that like button. If you can't dirty that subscribe button. I hope to catch you in the next video, and I hope that you have an epic day.